Good evening and welcome to our final public meeting in the development of the Hellam Hills Master Plan. Lancaster Conservancy's mission is to provide wild and forested lands and clean waterways for our community forever. The Hellam Hills Master Planning process is the full realization of this mission as we seek our community's input and support for the restoration of these beautiful river hills. Last Wednesday, we announced another exciting acquisition along this same corridor. After months of negotiation, the Conservancy placed an additional 1,066 acres under agreement to be acquired in 2023. As you can see by this map, the new acquisition is directly adjacent to our existing preserves, bringing the land protected in this region to over 2,000 acres. At a total of $12 million for acquiring and stewarding this new parcel, it is our largest and most expensive purchase ever. This is a monumental investment and undertaking for our organization, and we are excited and energized by the challenge and opportunity. Our path to protecting land in York County began 13 years ago when the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, who we know as DCNR, asked the Lancaster Conservancy to be the lead on a conservation landscape project we now call the Susquehanna Riverlands. The effort is focused on protecting the incredible natural resources that border the historic Susquehanna River, to engage residents, local leaders, and community partners to prioritize the protection of this landscape, and to place a higher emphasis on getting people outdoors while restoring the land and the waterways. We've come to see the river as a resource that connects York and Lancaster counties. We know that nature doesn't begin and end at a county or municipal line. Tonight, you're going to see a nearly finished version of a plan 18 months in the making. We've heard and value your input, and we look forward to inviting you on site, which I will talk about later in the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our Senior VP of Stewardship, Brandon Tennis, to talk about our long-term management strategy for these nature preserves.
Thank you very much, Rich. Good evening, everybody. The Hellam Hills Conservation Area consists of 1,041 acres preserved by the Lancaster Conservancy within just 5 years. Compare that to the 5,000 acres that the Conservancy preserved within its first 50 years. We are a land trust committed to our mission in preserving and stewarding natural lands within the Susquehanna River corridor in York County, as well as all across Lancaster County. Obviously, we are committed, invested, process-oriented, and mission-driven, and successful. Just last week, as Fritz has said, the press released the Conservancy's announcement about contracting the purchase of an additional 1,061 acres within the Hellam Hills as preserved natural and public lands. This addition continues the build out of the Conservancy's Hellam Hills Conservation Area, which currently is comprised of Hellam Hills and Wizard Ranch nature preserves, including Buzzard Roost and Wildcat Bluff, but will now also include this most recent addition, including Shoals Rock and the demanding view of the Shocks Mill Bridge crossing the Susquehanna River, overlooking world-renowned farmland. A conservation area, as in the Hellam Hills Conservation Area, is a new management strategy for the Conservancy, in which we group together nature preserves that are adjacent or in close proximity into larger management units that were otherwise separated by property boundaries. This allows us the opportunity to manage large landscapes for both ecosystem health and passive recreation opportunities more holistically, by undoing the damage that has been done by the division of our natural lands and ecosystems in the first place. This strategy was brought forth through the Conservancy's development of an integrated land management plan, which was a collaborative planning process that involved publicly accessible natural lands managers from state parks, county parks, game lands, and more, into stewardship planning for the entire Susquehanna Riverlands conservation landscape. As a first project of the Integrated Land Management Plan, the Conservancy has been working with our partners, such as Hellam Township, Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and the National Park Service, and our consultants, to develop a master plan for the Hellam Hills Conservation Area. The master plan guides our balance in providing passive recreation with habitat and ecosystem health and restoration, and aligns well with the Hellam Township's open space plan and York County's comprehensive plan. This most recent addition, as now part of the Hellam Hills Conservation Area, will be aligned with this Hellam Hills Conservation Area Master Plan by a similar approach of highlighting the conservation values of this addition property while putting forth a plan as a publicly accessible natural landscape within the Hellam Hills Conservation Area for public access, trails, overlooks, restoration, and unique land management that serves the property as a healthy and fully functioning ecosystem. We've come a long way. We've all come a long way. In our desire to preserve our natural land heritage, our success in doing so, and our planning and our partnership building that it took to get the job done. But this new addition to the Hellam Hills Conservation Area shows we are not done. Not you, not me, not us, not the Conservancy. Where there remains natural lands, there remains the need for us to work together toward the greener future that we all desire for hunting, fishing, hiking, swimming, riding, playing, art and scientific study, peace and solace, and so much more. Thank you for your passion, and thank you for engaging in this planning process. We are pleased to present to you tonight the fruits of all our labor, the master plan for the Hellam Hills Conservation Area. So without further ado, please let me reintroduce to you Peter Simone and Sarah Leeper of Simone Collins Landscape Architecture.
Thanks, Brandon, and it's great to be with everyone tonight, and thank you for your interest and attendance at these meetings. Here's our agenda tonight. I won't read it. You can do that yourself. It's pretty straightforward. But I do want to remind you that if you have a question or a comment during the presentation, you can type it in on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will address those questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to do that. We've been working with you now, as Fritz said, for 18 months. Our public meeting started about a year ago. And our team is multidisciplined. As landscape architects and planners, we've been leading the effort, but working closely with the Conservancy and our friends at these various firms. Resource Environmental Solutions, our ecologists and scientists who've been doing the state of the lands evaluation with flora and fauna. Revision Architecture has worked with the entire team in designing the structures you're going to see tonight. Forested is a firm that specializes in permaculture and has spearheaded the food forest recommendations for the project. And AD Marble is looking at our regulatory issues, especially with cultural resources as this plan moves forward. We've also been really lucky to work with a really terrific steering committee. You can see their names at the left. And also we've engaged a number of project partners throughout the study. They have been invaluable with giving us feedback and input suggestions throughout this 18-month process. A master plan, just to remind all of us, is the first step in a process. And we're at the right of that lower line of tasks. We're almost there with an approved master plan, final master plan. And then we will go back to that top line of the Conservancy will and secure funding, go through design and engineering and implementation in a phased way to implement the recommendations you're going to see tonight over a period of years. Here is our schedule. And so after tonight's meeting, we're going to have one more meeting with our study committee. If we have any final recommendations or tweaks to the plan, we will hear from them about those, make those final edits. And we will be publishing the draft plan soon, so you can see all the details in the plan. Tonight, we're really just going to touch on all the work that's been done and hit the high points of the master plan. This is our fourth public meeting, as was noted, and we've had really great attendance throughout the process. We appreciate all of you who have hung in there over this year-long process, and it's been really important that you have been a part of this public planning process with us. So again, as you saw on the previous map, there's a little closer view. The conservation area is made up of the Hellam Hills Nature Preserve and the Wizard Ranch Nature Preserve, just over 1,000 acres. And you can see the locations on the Susquehanna River. And we've developed conservation goals working with our team, hearing from you, and they're a little different for each of the preserve areas. For Hellam Hills, we aim to preserve and enhance the sensitive habitats and strengthen the community connections with the preserve with facilities that allow for individual exploration and nature study. And at Wizard Ranch, which many of you may recall was a working farm and ecologically needs more uplift than Hellam Hills, relatively speaking. We want this site to serve as a living classroom for ecological enhancement, including watershed management, which we know is so important, and then stewardship of the habitats, and also creating spaces where people can come together and learn and have interactions and learn about all the great connections between we human beings and nature. First, we're going to talk tonight about the Hellam Hills Preserve, and here's a little closer view of it. This is the existing conditions, which I think many of you are familiar with. As you know, the majority of the site is forested. We have presently an area that's open for hunting is below Furnace Road, as you can on the map, and it's close to 800 acres here. And in terms of the ecological focus, which we're going to hear about in 1 second, it's really focused on watershed enhancement, invasives removals, which is a prevalent theme in all natural lands, forest regeneration, and also encouraging breeding habitats for birds. And the activities are, again, really directed at self-guided hiking activities. And also we want to have, we've suggested an emergency access between Furnace Road to River Road to facilitate, emergency responder access to the site. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mike McGraw, who is one of the chief scientists and ecologists with RES. Mike?
Great, thank you, Peter, appreciate it. So I'm going to speak to you tonight just specific to the Hellam Hills Nature Preserve. My colleague Jesse will talk about Wizard Ranch. In previous meetings, we went into detail about all the different scientifically valid, peer-reviewed survey methods that we've enacted that are standardized and repeatable. But here we're just going to talk about some of the things that we found using those methods on both of these preserves. I think some of the most interesting things are, despite there being in some areas intact forest, there's a lot of locations on the site where the mature canopy trees are intact, but there's little to no hardwood regeneration. And that's a function of deer overpopulation, browsing on every little sapling that tries to make its way, and also invasive species. So it was important in our data collection to identify those areas and prioritize those accordingly within the plan. Our botanical inventories produced 148 plant species. Interestingly, of those, 26% were invasives, but those constituted roughly 3/4 of the site's spatial occupancy. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done related to invasive species on the site. And again, important that we prioritize those so we can get the maximum value from efforts. Interestingly, and probably no surprise to those of you that enjoy the outdoors, some of the highest conservation areas are related to really a plethora of wetland seeps that occur on the site that are feeding the streams, and these beautiful dry outcrops, these rocky outcrops that occur within the system. The bird species is pretty robust. Reptiles and amphibians, pretty robust, as well as mammals. So it was a real pleasure to document fauna at this site. Next slide, please. So we put together ecological recommendations that were roughly broken into 6 categories. You can see some of them here. I think of most note to share with you is the stream and wetland resources on site. There's some impairment, right? There's a lot of topography and there's a lot of historical use by humans. So there's some highly eroded systems, So we took a much closer look at that, and excitedly, working with a great group like Lancaster Conservancy, there's real opportunity for stream and wetland restoration that could even serve as a mitigation bank to offset other impacts within the watershed. So we've developed this approach to stream restoration. As Peter mentioned, invasive species management is really important here. So we've identified a stepwise process, which areas are we should invest in first to roll that out over years. There's some overgrown conifer plantations. So we have some recommendations as related to those, how we could get some dramatic ecological uplift through management of those. And also, as Peter mentioned, breeding birds, insects, and even to some extent, mammals and reptiles and amphibians are a driving force in how we make decisions related to spatial ecology with our recommendations. So I think for all you birders out there, you'll be delighted to see that we took a very cognizant approach as related to not only what's out there, but what's missing that could historically be present. And then lastly, looking at that forest regeneration health, one common theme through this is deer management. It's going to be important that deer management is an important part of this and could be a win-win with a robust hunting community in the region. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphical depiction of the ecological recommendations. You'll see that it's largely going to remain as this beautiful forest. A lot of the work's going to happen underneath that canopy as related to invasive species management. And in some areas, the invasives are so bad, or there's other reasons why we want to open the canopy a little bit more. So all those Bs and the A, we're looking at successional habitat, which supports a lot of amazing bird species that are in decline in the region. And then there's already a small meadow area that we'd like to expand upon for both aesthetic and ecological values. And the last thing I'll mention on this is you can see the retirement in light green of a lot of old logging road trails and other road trails that really don't serve a function out there. This is a great opportunity for a win-win. We control invasives and we restore these, and we have these tendrils of successional habitat that will eventually become part of the canopy, but will provide 30 to 40 years of positive edge effect and could attract species like cerulean warbler and other great forest breeding species that benefit from small canopy breaks within an otherwise forested system. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it on to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll be kind of walking through the activity recommendations for Hellam Hills. We had some goals and kind of the site program. One was really to kind of identify key points for public access, both for hiking in and parking. Kind of look at trails as focusing on destinations throughout the site. Pete had spoke about the emergency access, kind of providing that through the site, and then also providing for some basic amenities, a small educational pavilion, restrooms, looking at, we're going to speak to wildcat area and looking at kind of the options for that existing residence. And then also just looking at how we integrate signage. And then last, we'll speak to hunting at Hellam Hills. So first, we're just going to kind of look at access. We're looking at 3 main access points into the Hellam Hills Nature Preserve. The main parking lot would be located right on opposite the Chimney Rock Road intersection with Furnace Road. So we're looking at kind of a main central parking lot area there. And all this parking area is, conceptual. We're looking at spaces for about 60 parking spaces, but that might be phased. So maybe it just is at first 30 parking spaces with the option of doing future parking if the demand is needed. Looking at a second parking area as kind of a trailhead parking area for the Mason-Dixon Trail. So again, looking at 10 to 20 spaces there. And then on the northern side of Chimney Rock Road, having another kind of trailhead parking area of 10 to 20 spaces. In terms of hike-in, we would still have our Mason-Dixon Trail entering the site both to the east and the west from River Road and Furnace Road. So those would be our hike-in areas. And we have a third hike-in area at a gravel access road into the site. And that becomes the start of the emergency trail, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So looking at how the trail network overlays on the site, we do kind of have that Mason-Dixon Trail, and dashed, you're seeing the existing corridor as it is today. We're maintaining both those entrances into the site. But then what we do is we start to kind of pull away from the current location, which follows up the utility access road, which accesses the water utility parcel in this area. We pull away from that and really start to let the trail go through the site, so that it starts to hit all the high points of the site. So it kind of comes around through the headwaters of Dugan Run and then crosses up and makes the ascent to Buzzard's Roost. From there, it comes back down to the Wildcat Bluffs, to that overlook, and then following what had formerly been the observation trail, and kind of falls along Wildcat Creek before coming back up to the existing trail alignment. So in all, that kind of extends that trail experience to about 5.5 miles through the site. We're still maintaining that existing former alignment in orange, and we're calling that kind of the cross preserve trail. So it gives the option for someone to still do that shorter hike through the site if they're hiking through on the Mason-Dixon Trail. We also have a series of trails that we're looking at the existing kind of logging roads on site and how we can reuse those to provide trails throughout the site. So one of the main trails we're looking at is, we call it the Buzzard Roost Overlook Trail. So you're seeing that in yellow, and this kind of uses existing trails to get people up to Buzzard's Roost. And this kind of comes up on the northern approach of Buzzard's Roost, which is a much more gentle approach. So we see that as kind of being an easy hike for people to do kind of a quick overlook hike. We also have in green what we're calling the Forest and Field Trail. So this really becomes more of a birding loop, and it hits some of the more intact bird community and allows for viewing of that throughout the site. And this is also the most gentle part of the site, so it would be a very accessible trail. The pavilion is kind of located at a key point along that birding loop, kind of overlooking a edge community area where there's a lot of bird activity. And then in red, we're seeing what we call the emergency access through trail. So again, this is taking advantage of the existing logging roads on site, which are pretty wide. They're about 6 to 8 feet wide, to provide for ATV access through the site. So if there's a major storm event that for some reason a part of River Road were to be closed off due to downed trees or wires, you would have kind of an option to get emergency ATVs through from Furnace down to River Road. And then last, looking over at the kind of western side of Furnace Road, this area we're kind of identifying as an ADA or skills hunting area. So the trail again is looking at being more accessible, and then kind of having 4 platforms for ADA hunting on that portion of the site. So in terms of kind of the features and facilities, we're trying to kind of, the most intense facilities kind of keep towards that Furnace Road. So looking at kind of a small restroom facility, that would be a composting toilet, probably a single occupancy. And then we also have the pavilion kind of located along that loop through the meadow. We have various runes throughout the site that we want to kind of make sure we call for interpretation. So the first is kind of the old farmhouse rooms located here. Obviously, we're all kind of familiar with Buzzard's Roost, so looking at an overlook in that area. Again, as the Mason-Dixon Trail kind of comes down through the hillside, there's a nice river overlook where you kind of have a gentle area here. And then we have our Wildcat Bluff overlook here. Also looking at the idea of having primitive camping along that connection trail there that would serve for through hikers of the Mason-Dixon Trail. So that would be kind of a reservation only situation. Coming up to number 7 is the former reservoir or kind of dam location along Wildcat Run. So we see that as kind of a nice interpretation point. There's a good kind of overlook of the creek in that area. And then again, coming up to another part along Wildcat along the Mason-Dixon line, there's a dramatic kind of overlook area of the creek valley. Coming up to 8, there's remnants of old kind of stream and spring runes. And then at 9 is the existing or the former mine, so open mine pit. And then 10 were those kind of hunting platforms for ADA hunting. And then there is one more rune kind of located over on Dugan's Run. So we want to make sure that kind of trails bring people past these areas so that you can kind of experience the history of the site, but also some of these might be opportunities for some interpretive signage. One of the things we also wanted to look at was just, making sure we start to look at the difficulty of the trails. DCNR, which is the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, or Conservation and Natural Resources, uses a standard to rate trails. You kind of see here on the left is kind of the idea of an easy trail where the slopes tend to be more gentle. And then you can see as you go up to the more difficult and the most difficult, that degree of steepness that's permitted increases along the slope. So we kind of looked at that, and we looked at the trails that we're proposing throughout the preserve and started to look at, how they rate. So really kind of central to some of the parking areas and then that ADA hunting area, you can see we have what we're calling universally accessible trails. So these are very similar to easy trails, except for the surface is more stable. So you're looking at kind of an even stable surface on those accessible trails. And then the easy trails, again, are kind of core to the site. Those areas that are more gentle, so kind of geared towards people that might have slight mobility issues, recovering from an injury, or kind of younger families that are hiking together. And then looking at those more difficult trails are some of that existing Mason-Dixon Trail and segments of that new Mason-Dixon Trail, which we really see that as being kind of a single track hiking trail. It does start to go through more extreme topography throughout the site. So that's kind of considered more difficult. Within the Hellam Hills area, we don't have any of trails that would be rated as most difficult. So most of these are pretty accessible if you're in good health. With that, I'm going to pass off to Pete to kind of review the Wildcat Bluff area.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Also, Tim had a question about some of the features on the Mason-Dixon Trail, and I think a couple of slides ago, Sarah went over those. I think she hit the high points, so hopefully that answers your question. And Terry Brown also submitted a question about, is there a map available yet with number of miles for trails? Terry, there isn't. And keep in mind, all the trails that Sarah just went over are mostly proposed. There is not a map presently, but I'm sure at some point in the future, the Conservancy will have a map to show trails as they are opened and made accessible to everyone. Wildcat Bluff is, if you've hiked over there, it's a house. It's at this high point, as the name implies, and our team looked at options for how this facility should be used in the future. And we didn't come to a conclusion, but there are options here. The first option is to continue to use it as it presently is. It's a residence that the Conservancy rents so that somebody's there, all the time. Below that, you'll see at number 8, there is an overlook that is accessible to the public. It's a hike-in facility only. Public access is really not allowed. And at some point in the near future, there'll be a gate at number 5 here. So that people can hike in there. We've shown a couple of camping pads that for long hikers that they could use that. And so this is one option to continue to use it as presently utilized. The second option is to repurpose it for Conservancy uses. It could be Conservancy offices. It could be classrooms where people could come and attend those classrooms or learning sessions with somebody like a Mike McGraw or Jesse Bruckner, who's going to teach you about wildlife in the preserve. Here, we do show handicap parking so that we can get people who have some mobility issues to the site, still having the lower overlook, but also adding number 9 here, an upper overlook. So we have a couple of places to enjoy this amazing view. And the third option is to really do away with that residence and to replace it with an open air pavilion, so that people could hike in, handicapped folks can drive up there and enjoy this amazing view at a larger pavilion. There'd also be restrooms here, still maintaining the lower viewpoint at 7 and the higher, another smaller, higher viewpoint at number 9. So a variety of options to consider the use of Wildcat Bluff as this preserve gets more developed by the Conservancy in the years ahead. Also, there was a question from Justin about hunting. And at Hellam Hills, the plan is to enter into cooperative agreement with the State Game Commission to make most of the preserve at Hellam Hills available to hunting, not by permit, but just normal hunting seasons. But we do want to restrict hunting sort of on this ridgeline as we face the river, and that can be, we think, well defined also with the trails that are going to run there. So the areas in red, we would not want to have hunting in. We would not allow it because of closeness to residential properties. But on the other side of that ridgeline, we would have hunting. And below Furnace Road, you can see a linear trail coming off of Chimney Rock Road, and we sort of a one-way in, one-way out hunting so that we could have some blinds there and really direct hunting away from the residences and to Furnace Road where we don't have residences. So that's the recommendation for hunting as this project moves forward. We're next going to transition over to Wizard Ranch Nature Preserve. And here, it's a smaller piece of property. We have about 250 acres. It's forested, but we have a lot of open meadows or hay fields. This was a working farm years ago. We have gravel driveways that go through the site. We have a small meadow down at the lower end of the site that you can see in that yellowish color. And here, comparatively speaking, this site ecologically needs more work than Hellam Hills, and we'll get to that in a minute. In terms of our goals and objectives for Wizard Ranch, we mentioned earlier we want this to be a demonstration site. It's going to serve as a regional hub for the Lancaster Conservancy stewardship with the existing properties and the ones that Brandon and Fritz mentioned earlier with a 2,000 acre complex. You can imagine there's going to be a need for an on-site presence to maintain and to manage these lands in an appropriate way. And you'll see a plan in a minute about how that's going to happen. This also is going to be the public face for the Lancaster Conservancy in York County. It's going to be a place where the Conservancy will invite folks in for continuing education type things and nature classes and tours and hikes. Also, one of the early projects is going to be to promote bat and nesting bird habitat. And as many of you know, the Boy Scouts hold a safari here every 4 years. That's going to continue to be done at this site. So this is really going to be a big activity center, comparatively speaking, to the Hellam Hills portion as time goes on. So to get into the ecological state, I'm going to introduce Jesse Bruckner from RES to go through that with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Pete. I'm Jesse Buckner. I'm an ecologist with RES. And as Mike McGraw said earlier, it's been a real pleasure working with the Lancaster Conservancy and working in this area. Wizard Ranch, it's nearby Hellam Hills and has a lot of similar conditions, but based on the land use, it also has some different issues that it's facing. It has a little bit more anthropogenic disturbance and more meadows and fields. So what we're looking at here is really valuable streams and wetlands. As Peter said, we're going to be focusing on this as a watershed area. There's a lot of things that can be done to enhance this area. There was a lack of understory in the forested areas, again, due to deer pressure. They come in and they're just eating a lot of the layers underneath. So there's not enough habitat stratification as much as we would like to see in an area like this. There's also a lot of mowed fields that don't have native species in them. So we're looking at that as a good opportunity for meadow enhancement, which is something that the Boy Scouts can be a part of and still use for their jamboree, but can be a more autogenic system that helps with habitat enhancement. Over 182 vegetation species were documented, but again, 32% of those were invasive, which is a little bit more than Hellam, but 85% of the site were those invasive species. So that's a pretty big coverage of primarily invasive species communities. So that's something we'd want to work on. There were 80 bird species documented, which is pretty great. Although there were a few missing birds, considering how much grassland there is there or how many fields, there were some birds that we thought would be present that weren't present there. And I'll let Mike McGraw speak to that in a few minutes. There's limited interior forest indicators. Again, a lot of this has to do with how many fields and edges there are, as well as the deer pressure. And it's mostly generalist species that are breeding. And this means the species that don't need the most native type habitats. They can survive when the invasives come in. We did have, again, a pretty robust amphibian and reptile population, and 10 mammals were noted, which again, there was a large white-tailed deer population. Do you want to speak to the birds, Mike, before we go to the next slide?
Thanks, Jesse, for the opportunity there. I'll be real quick, but I think one of the lowest hanging fruits here is it's low cost, and it's very easy to do to convert these meadows into as Jesse mentioned, a much more diverse system with native grasses, native wildflowers, and these volant species, animals that can fly in, i.e. grassland birds. We feel there's a real opportunity to steward grassland breeding birds here. And we heard adjacent and nearby in row crop grasshopper sparrows, but none on site. Eastern meadowlark nearby, but none breeding in these hayed fields. So yeah, just really excited about that opportunity to steward some grassland birds on the site, in addition to the wetland and forest bird species that we already saw. So thanks.
The next slide. So we divided things similar to Hellam of different restoration types that we're looking to use in this area. Number one, again, being the stream and floodplain restoration, especially that man-made pond. We're looking to make that more naturalized and turn into a wetland and floodplain, which you can see when you're out there. It's already trying to turn into that. There's a lot of native plants around there that would like to have a little bit more hydrologic connection. So we're looking to assist that and create that habitat. As most people know, wetlands are really great for the environment. They're carbon sinks, they're filtrations for nutrient, they're additional habitat for a lot of species like frogs, fish, salamanders, really cool things. So they bring a whole other element that we can really boost. Again, there's a lot of invasives here. So one of the first things that we'll need to do is invasive management, and then also just foster forest diversity. And part of that goes back to controlling deer population. And I think that the Conservancy will be allowing more bow and arrow hunting. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, to kind of help with this. But with the deer continuously eating the hardwoods that are trying to regenerate or the understory, you're just kind of, again, lacking those stratifications. So that's one thing we want to increase. And then again, with the meadow restoration of looking at replacing kind of the turf grasses and orchard grasses and these old farm grasses with more native warm season grasses and forbs and things that the birds and the other creatures will enjoy a little bit more. Next slide. So you can see here on this map where some of these things are planned. The yellow are all of these existing lawn areas that we'd like to create more meadow habitat in. The kind of the green area up towards the north, B, will be heavy invasive management for the forest, because there's some great bluff forest up there as you get up towards River Road. And then you see that floodplain restoration in C, kind of, if anyone's driven in there, it's sort of where the roads meet. There's a stream crossing, and kind of looking at better ways to manage the water that's flowing through there and restore all of those things. And then E is the successional forest management. So successional is those newer growth forests that right now are really covered with invasives and really difficult to get through. But all of these things together will make a really great habitat that's functional for the animals, but also will be great community classroom and still usable by everybody and all the humans that are using the area. Do you have anything to add, Mike?
No, thanks for I could, but I'll just go on and on. I'm easily excited about this space. I love marrying, ecological restoration, true spaces for wildlife with human interventions, right? Thoughtful human interventions is a great living laboratory, and I think it's going to be really exciting for all different user groups. So that's all. Thanks.
I'll pass it back to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So kind of going hand in hand with the ecological restorations, we're also looking at agroforestry as kind of a stewardship tool on site. So we have 4 areas that we've identified for agroforestry practices, and each one kind of demonstrates a different type of practice. In area A, which is this yellow kind of overlay area, is really focused on a traditional kind of food forest. This is located closer to kind of the public parking area, so it really becomes the public face of agroforestry on site. Looking at area B would be kind of a woody florals production, and we'll kind of look at examples of each of these as we move forward. Area C is the live state production. So these both would be kind of geared with that stream restoration, looking at plants that are being produced for kind of restoration projects themselves. So they kind of support that floodplain habitat in this area. And then the last area is kind of a pole production, which is area D. So this does overlay that kind of forest restoration area that Jesse spoke of. And here we're really looking at planting specific tree species that can be used and harvested for timber poles, fence posts, those types of activities. So looking at each of those types, food forest really kind of, again, is focused on that visitor hub, and looking at really kind of creating a layered ecology with both forest floor as well as trees and shrubs. Things such as berries being located at those key areas where people kind of walk along a path and they could easily pick something as they're walking. In terms of the woody florals, these are kind of types of shrubs or smaller scale trees that you would cut and use for a florist industry. Again, we're growing kind of shrub material that can be kind of coppice. That means you're kind of cutting it back to the ground so that it regrows quickly, but it also adds that wildlife benefit. So again, this would be kind of near that riparian area, so it can help with reestablishment of good habitat down in that area. Similar to that is the live stakes. So again, we're looking at those kind of willows and dogwoods, native shrubs that would be key to those riparian zones. But in these situations, we'd be harvesting those stakes so that they could be used in restoration projects in other parts of the Conservancy's lands. So again, they're being used both for the restoration efforts on site, but then can help to foster restoration throughout the region. And then last is kind of an example of what those pole forests would look like. I believe this is a stand of locusts, which is one of the better pole productions because it is so rot resistant. But we could have a variety of trees within that forest that would all be kind of harvested for various poles, but then also providing habitat. One of those key is kind of maybe looking at various trees that do provide for pollinator habitat, as well as being harvested for use throughout the Conservancy's activities. Moving on, we'll kind of again focus in on the activities of the site. Within the site, we identified through our process, a site program. We do have a stewardship hub that Pete spoke to. Also kind of that public engagement hub. We're looking at the 2 existing cabins on site to be repurposed. And then again, a series of hiking trails. There are existing kind of social trails on site. You can see dashed in orange. So kind of trying to build upon that existing network. We have our agroforestry areas, and then looking at kind of our open meadows as being some of the key kind of improvements on site. And then that floodplain wetland stream bank restoration. And we'll kind of zoom in on that towards the end of the presentation and kind of walk through that, as well as kind of having the Boy Scout Safari. Again, an event that we need to consider since it takes place every 4 years, but again, it's not an everyday present on site by any means. So again, first looking at that site access, we are maintaining site access from Accomack Road, though we are recommending kind of realigning the driveway a little further away from some of the private residences, so that you feel like you're entering the site and not a private residence. As that road comes through, we are looking at kind of relocating the crossing of that road, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that when we zoom in on this area. In terms of parking, we do have an area for public parking. Right now we're showing about 55 spaces, but again, there might be an interim phase where we just get initial access on site, and then that parking kind of gets developed as needed. With the Stewardship Center, it does have its own parking that would be focused towards staff and visitors to the that are conducting business with the Conservancy. So we're looking at 20 spaces in this area. And then we do have kind of a trailhead parking that's more close down to the stream valley. So that provides kind of ADA access down to that area with about 20 spaces. And then we do have kind of an emergency access. There's an existing road that or trail that brings you up into the back part of the site. So kind of maintaining that as an emergency access point into the site. In terms of our trails, we have kind of simplified the trail system since our last presentation. One of the key things is kind of maintaining that Mason-Dixon Trail along River Road. As the Conservancy moves forward, they're interested in looking at the connection through Wizard Ranch, but at this time, that still revolves around some negotiations. So the River Road would maintain that corridor for the Mason-Dixon Trail. In terms of a site trail, we're looking at kind of a red trail that would be called the Border Trail, and that really kind of allows you to kind of hike the whole part of the site, hitting some of the high points. We have some dramatic overviews from some of the various meadows up in these corners. This one in particular gives you a nice long view down the Susquehanna Valley towards Round Top. Looking at kind of getting an accessible trail here is the Stream Loop Trail. And this is kind of, the stream on Wizard Ranch is a little different in nature, especially in this upper reach. There is more of a floodplain associated with the stream. So there's some gentler side slopes where you really can kind of get people down closer to the stream without being kind of in the floodway of the stream itself. As opposed on Hellam Hills, where you kind of have the stream gorges where it's really hard to get people down along that stream edge. So we see this as kind of being an accessible trail loop that would bring people through that stream area with opportunities to kind of interact and learn about the restoration that happens kind of in that core area. Looking at kind of in yellow would be your Cross Meadow Trail. So again, this would just be kind of a simple mown trail that would allow for you to kind of do a shorter loop trail if you're hiking the Border Trail. And then we're maintaining kind of the access road that exists that brings you up into the upper meadow and purple. And then at the food forest area, kind of developing a loop trail that would allow you to kind of come through major parts of the food forest, but then also have overlooks into the woody floral and the wetland coppice area. So in terms of our features and facilities, at number one, we have our public engagement hub. So that's comprised of the repurposing of the existing cabin, as well as a new open air pavilion. Number two would be our stewardship hub. So that is a new building with a yard area and parking. We have some former ruins. There's an old root cellar in the area of number three, which that'll be more apparent. We're kind of removing some of the old hedgerows in this area to kind of expand this meadow area into one ecology space. So that will be more visible. Looking down at number four, we want to make sure we kind of have an interpretation of all the work we've done here. So we kind of have a wetland overlook. And then looking at those meadow overlooks at number five. And then just making sure we have kind of wayfinding signage as people have the opportunity to hike in on that emergency access trail. So again, looking at those trail difficulties, looking at that stream loop trail being kind of that universally accessible trail coming right off of that parking area, and then also having an accessible trail that would bring you over to that wetland overlook down in that area. And then looking at kind of those easy trails, really kind of making up the majority of our trails to the site, with the more difficult trails being kind of that upper ridgeline trail of the Border Trail. And then in the area of that emergency access, this is would be rated as most difficult. It's a pretty steep climb through that existing trail there. In terms of hunting at Wizard Ranch Nature Preserve, we would still be working with the State Game Commission. In this area, we would be limiting Wizard Ranch just to bow and arrow hunting. Again, kind of excluding that area along the ridgeline. So really kind of limiting hunting downslope towards the river. We're also seeing your safety zones where hunting would be prohibited by the terms of the State Game Commission. But then also kind of making sure that that area between both our visitor hub and stewardship hub would also kind of be a no hunting zone up in that key meadow area. So I do want to just kind of zoom in on what we call that core area. So just to quick orient everyone, this is the existing Accomack Road. You can see the existing driveway, currently a gravel driveway that kind of comes in to the area. As you get down into the stream valley, so in blue, you're kind of seeing how the stream braids through. It wraps around the edge of that pond. It doesn't actually connect to the pond at all. The pond is fed by stormwater and kind of overland seeps that come down into that pond. But the roads cross that stream a total of 3 times. So we have a crossing here, one here, and then one here. And all of these crossings happen where that stream is kind of braiding through. So one of the things we really want to focus on, and this would be done in coordination with kind of the floodplain restoration, is relocate that crossing so that it's really only crossing once in this area. So this is kind of looking at a refined blow up of the concept. So we're going to kind of zoom in on 3 areas here. The first being that public engagement hub. Then we'll kind of go over the stewardship hub. And then last, kind of look at that stream valley restoration access improvements. So again, looking at our public engagement hub, we have our existing cabin at 1, which would be repurposed and served as a visitor orientation point, kind of a check-in desk, have small storage area. And then in terms of public events, we really want to focus on getting people outdoors. So looking at that open air pavilion as a gathering space with kind of a central lawn where people for maybe a larger event can kind of flow out into that lawn area. But then that quickly transitions into meadow. So this is all part of that larger Accomack meadow. With how the parking lays out, we have some key existing trees in this area we want to maintain. So we're kind of looping that parking around those tree areas and kind of trying to break up the parking so that visually, if you're driving down Accomack Road, you're not looking right at a big, large parking lot. It's a little more spread out. And then you can see how that food forest loop trail kind of comes down along 6 and loops back up over. And then the border trail kind of takes off from that food forest loop trail. So this is the kind of existing photograph of that cabin in this area, and then kind of looking at the proposed cabin. Not a lot is needed other than kind of really reconfiguring the interior space so that you have kind of your visitor desk, some storage and display area, and then looking at kind of relocating the door so it functions for the new layout of the center. And then looking at the idea that you could have a potential addition for a single bathroom, or again, we might look at a composting restroom on this site as well. Transitioning to the stewardship hub. So again, coming in off of that new driveway entrance, we kind of wanted to create more of a buffer here so that the public's kind of encouraged to come to this area. This would be more of a staff driveway, bringing you into that small parking area. 12 spaces would be kind of permanent paved, and then looking at some overflow parking opposite that with either a grass paver situation or kind of even just a grass material that can sustain vehicle traffic. And then here we've kind of set up a one-way loop. So this is kind of a banked barn situation where you have one level, the upper level is entered from the parking area, and then the loop kind of comes down to a lower level that enters into the yard area. And then people leaving the yard with their trucks would be coming out the one-way system and then back out. So we kind of set that system up for safety, for staff stewardship needs. and then also giving them a large yard, and then looking at kind of that buffer area through here, both of the residences and then from kind of the public parking areas. So again, that you can kind of see how this facility would be banked into the hillside. This is kind of the staff entrance that would be geared more towards the public face of the preserve, kind of towards Acromat. And then you can see behind that, you would have kind of your lower level, your vehicle bays, and then your resource yard is kind of hidden on the back side of the building. So last, kind of going into the Stream Valley Restoration Area. So again, looking at this area, we've kind of shown in this aqua color just the limits of kind of that riparian zone, where we really want to kind of focus on creating one hydrology. So again, incorporating that pond with wetlands into the hydrology. And again, this is just conceptual. So this might not be the final limits of what's considered riparian or wetland. It's just diagrammatic, but you can see in dashed here is the existing road. So looking to realign that road. So it again forms that single crossing with a new vehicular bridge leading to our trailhead parking area. From there, we would have kind of a pedestrian boardwalk that would bring you over and connect into that western meadow or the western edge of the stream trail. So that kind of creates your lower loop of the stream side trail. Again, coming over to the observation area at 10, having a small footbridge that would cross the stream here. So again, looking at that accessible trail route over to number 10. So this becomes a key kind of gathering point and observation point for the wetland restoration area. And then also kind of maintaining, we do have an existing access road that brings you up into this meadow. And this is the main meadow where the Boy Scouts camp. So they do kind of need a way to get all their supplies and camp gear up into the meadow every 4 years. So looking at the idea of doing kind of a ford crossing through here or some sort of creative construction of that road so that we can maintain hydrology on both sides and not create kind of a culverted crossing in that area. So there's kind of different techniques we can use there. But again, those would be explored further as we start to really get into the design and engineering of the restoration work in this area. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Brandon to kind of talk us through some of the next steps.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The Hellam Hills Conservation Area Master Plan is a vision driven by the Conservancy's mission and vetted by partner and public participation. Its final draft is a call to active stewardship, as in care for and access to shared land and water. We now begin the process of prioritizing each element of our shared vision by procuring additional funding, refining design through engineering, aligning with municipal, state, and federal permitting, and building our collective dream for our future and that of the next generation of people, plants, and animals within this conservation landscape. First, I'd like to mention that the Conservancy has already hired a regional preserves manager for the Hellam Hills Conservation Area. Let me say that again. The Conservancy has already hired a regional preserves manager for the Hellam Hills Conservation Area. Travis Lyle has been a full-time land steward for the Conservancy. Travis will now be designated to the Hellam Hills Conservation Area, working under the direction of our senior preserves manager, Steve Moore, in performing both daily and seasonal routine maintenance. This is a first for the Conservancy to have a regional preserves manager designated to a specific area. Next, we will start implementing the lowest hanging fruit by addressing any deteriorating conditions with a small supply of funding already made available. We will also, this year, begin the follow-up planning phases of the master plan for stream and wetland restoration for both preserves and habitat restoration for Wizard Ranch to include a robust agroforestry operations and maintenance plan. We will also, this year, begin the follow-up planning phases for public access, including parking lots and trails, but also the further development of the Wizard Ranch Engagement Hub and Stewardship Hub. We will begin the trail work of repurposing and improving existing trails that are to remain and restoring other trails that are no longer sustainable. We will prioritize opening trails in a rough but available form and then continue our work to improve trail conditions to include ADA and universal accessibility in both preserves. Our immediate trail goals will include working with the Mason-Dixon Trail System and York Hiking Club to complete a significant reroute of the Mason-Dixon Trail through Hellam Hills Nature Preserve to highlight the uniqueness of the preserve, while also realizing a direct trail route to Buzzard Roost Overlook. Lastly, we will work with the Pennsylvania Game Commission to open Hellam Hills Nature Preserve to firearm and archery public hunting and Wizard Ranch Nature Preserve to archery only public hunting for once public access has been developed. Now, ambition will not slow this plan. We are committed and we know that we have your support. Only funding will slow us down. For remember, the Lancaster Conservancy is a private nonprofit land trust doing the work of preserving natural lands and making them accessible to the public. And even though we have solid relationships with funders such as the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and National Park Service, we will need to raise and match those funds with private donations. So yes, we will again look to each of you as we have through this planning process, and your friends, your family, colleagues, civic groups, and all others who share this vision for not just preserved natural lands, but public natural lands to help us ensure that this vision is a reality.
Thank you, Brandon. So at this point, we're going to kind of open up to questions. So if you do have questions, if you can try to type them into the Q&A box, but we do have some already typed in during the presentation. So I'll kind of read through these and Pete will kind of figure out who should address them. So the first one came in early on in the presentation asking if camping will be allowed.
Yeah, and except for the Wildcat Run facility, we have not proposed camping for the public. Of course, at Wizard Ranch with the Boy Scout Safari, they camp there, and also with the agreement with the Conservancy, the Boy Scouts do have the opportunity to do other smaller camping events, but no public camping really on any scale is proposed at this point.
From Patricia, the stone foundations weren't farmhouses ones. They were buildings for working on flax into linen. The farmhouse was on the left of the entrance on Furnace Road, the somewhat cleared area.
Okay.
Patricia, thank you for that clarification, and maybe we'll revise it to say farmstead just to kind of clarify that, since there's a lot of buildings associated with the farmhouse itself. We had someone ask what ADA hunting is.
Yeah, good question. Certainly there's a component of every community with folks with mobility issues, and the hunting community is no different. So through our conversations with hunters and the Conservancy, we've suggested that the area above Furnace Road that is presently open to hunting have some accessible trails where folks with mobility issues can access that area and enjoy hunting just like able-bodied folks. So that's really what we're proposing there, just to allow folks to have that opportunity. And a related question came in about would hunting be archery only? And as Brandon just alluded to, hunting archery only would be at Wizard Ranch, but at Hellam Hills would have both archery and firearms.
Okay, from a gentleman who lives along Tower Road, he had voiced his concerns last meeting, or following the last meeting, we had a phone conversation about the parking lot on Chimney Rock Road. I'm just kind of, he's concerned about trespassers on his property, and I know we've had ongoing conversations. So I guess he was asking if we could put the parking lot in the middle of Chimney Rock, and now, sorry. I think we can follow up conversation.
Yeah, I think the gist of the question is, and thanks for bringing this up, we did move the parking lot from the southern end of Chimney Rock Road more to the center, and we did have a great conversation with you a few months ago. We do appreciate the follow-up comments, so be happy to talk to you more about that and our thoughts with trying to move the parking away from the southern end so that trespassing is minimized, and also how we oriented the trail. So we were happy to follow up with you so we could arrange a time for our team and also someone from the Conservancy, probably Brandon, to have a more detailed conversation with you.
The next question, is there a decent coyote population within the land? I know there has been occasional bears sighted along the Hellam Hills. Would the planned habitat support a bear population?
Yeah, this sounds like a Mike or Jesse question.
Yeah, hey, happy to address it. So a lot of the ecological restoration that we're hoping to enact here is really from the ground up. It's a holistic ecological restoration, building that trophic web. So getting native plants in there are going to support native insects. Native insects support native birds, small mammals, and other insects that hunt insects. So by building that trophic web, providing areas with shrubs that are berry producing, with confidence, yes, it will improve the habitat for any bears that may be on site. And also, as related to coyotes, you know, it's difficult. We didn't do a full population analysis, but we do know coyotes occupy the area, which is a good thing. They're one of the only species, actually bears too, that keep deer honest and are a natural control for deer population to some extent, but not nearly enough. So yeah, they're both present. We do have large mammals, which is a good indicator that there is an existing trophic web that's robust, but we're going to build on that. We're going to improve the ecosystem overall, which will, what do they say? A rising tide lifts all ships. So yeah, these iconic species will also benefit from this restoration.
Thanks, Mike. Regarding the newly acquired lands, we had someone ask if it would be rented out to farming for corn or soybean as done in previous years.
Yeah, I'm again, the Conservancy has an agreement. I'd say in the short term that use will probably continue, but in the long term, I would expect that to change. But again, the Conservancy is just in the process of acquiring the ground. They will perform some kind of a master plan in the coming year or years on that property, and that determination will be made at that time.
Next question, when will everything be up and running to the public? Is there a planned date?
Yeah, I think Brandon sort of answered that question when he finished the presentation, that he listed the things that are going to be starting. This is a long process. It's an expensive process. And as Brandon said, it's not a question of will, it's a question of funding. So as the Conservancy makes improvements and ecological uplifts to these properties, it will move forward, but it's going to take a number of years. I don't think the Conservancy has a specific number of years yet because it is dependent on funding. But again, with unlimited money, they'd move quickly. They'd move forward as quickly as they could, and so we'll just have to wait, and all of us wait and see how quickly they can move.
We had a question from Judith regarding if the Conservancy will have an influence on how the Boy Scouts use the land, mainly kind of focused on volume control on the site during those jamborees.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we can pass that on. You remember the song they played, "Live and Let Die," and so we will pass that comment on to the Scouts, and try to get, if you want to send us an email, we could get back to you directly after we have that conversation.
Okay. Will the 3 areas along River Road that extend to the bank of the river be used for public river access for canoes, kayaks, boats?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had lots of internal conversations with our team and with our friends at the Conservancy about that. And that's not proposed at this point. The main reason was the Conservancy is very conscious about being good neighbors. And we were concerned about creating a river access point without adequate parking that became a nuisance for the folks who lived on River Road. So at this point, that's not proposed. perhaps with the newly acquired land. I can't remember if that's on the river, but maybe that's possible there. But I think the concern is before anything like that would be proposed, everyone would have to feel comfortable that that type of an access wouldn't create traffic issues on a small road like River Road.
From Julie, how can volunteers help?
Okay, I'm going to pass that over to either Brandon or Fritz, whoever wants to take that.
I'll jump in there, Peter. Thank you. Hi, Julie. We have a volunteer page on our website, and we welcome anyone that would love to get engaged. We have a volunteer training through our volunteer land steward program. We will be scaling engagement here on the site. And I guess while I'm here, maybe I will just address engagement and upcoming events on the site. I want to start by thanking all of you for attending these planning sessions. And the next step is really an open house that we are planning for everyone who's on this call. We want to welcome the residents of Hellam Township, Lancaster, and York counties to the Wizard Ranch site. We're planning that open house for Friday, May 6th. Link to register for that event is going to be placed in the chat. It'll also be put on the screen. And we ask that you register online for a specific time where you'll have a chance to interact and ask questions of our professional staff and the consultants from Simone Collins. You'll have the opportunity to walk the proposed trails, to view the floodplain and wetland area, and see how the plans will translate into on-the-ground implementation in the coming years. We look forward to opening the site and welcoming you in. And this is the first of what will be many interpretive events and volunteer work days to come in 2022 and beyond. So again, if you're interested in volunteering, you can go and register under the volunteer page on our website, or reach out to any of the staff, myself included, on the email exchange, and just say you're interested in volunteering and getting involved. But please do consider joining us and checking out the link there for May 6th. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Fritz. Yeah, another question really for the Conservancy. There was a question from Tim about, is the Conservancy considering purchasing a Lehman farm on Accomack Road and the Swisher farm on Furnace Road? One of the streams flowing into the quarry area passes through both of these properties. I'll again pass that off probably to Brandon, I guess.
Well, what I would say to that is the Conservancy is interested in any natural lands that make themselves available, but we are not targeting any private property at this time. It's not how we do business. If anybody has any interest of their natural lands becoming preserved through the Lancaster Conservancy, whether through a conservation easement or becoming a nature preserve that the Conservancy owns, manages, and provides for public access, we are more than willing to speak with you. Thank you.
We have a final question from Justin. Will there be a trail that connects Wizard Ranch to Hellam Hills? And I think, Pete, I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is certainly a goal, but we didn't want to be presumptuous with the private properties that exist between those two preserves. It would be great in the future to have some type of an access easement between the two properties, and that's to be determined in the future. We hope it happens, but again, trying not to be presumptuous. We did not show that on the plan, and that's really a discussion between the Conservancy and those particular property owners as this endeavor moves forward. Patricia Lehman has another question or comment, and thank you. The entrance on Furnace Road is the Lehman 1700s farm. So thank you for clarifying that. So I don't see any other questions.
Yeah,
I think we've addressed most of them.
Yeah, I'm just looking in the chat. Tim from the Mason-Dixon Trail had asked, and I know Brandon has been coordinating with you about the proposed reroutes for the Mason-Dixon Trail kind of going through the site, and the Conservancy looks forward to coordinating with the Mason-Dixon Trail Club moving forward as that reroute happens. And then last, just another follow-up to just someone really hoping to get, river access for paddlecraft. And I'll just add that one of the things with River Road is one, be a good neighbor, but also just the safety of bringing people down. I mean, there's points on that road where it does come to one lane. So having kind of river access in that area that would generate traffic on a road that is so narrow is kind of also just a safety concern. So I think the Conservancy's hope is that, you know, with the future acquisition that they can provide that river access up closer to the Codorus Creek.
Yeah. Great. So with that, we're going to close. I don't know if Fritz or Brandon, you want to make any final comments?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to lean in towards my microphone and make sure that I'm not muffled. I apologize for that earlier. And Tim and the Mason-Dixon Trail System, we look forward. The time is coming near here. We look forward to fully engaging with you, groundproofing out there the next edition of the Mason-Dixon Trail System, or the Mason-Dixon Trail, as it will evolve and traverse the Hellam Hills Nature Preserve. That's coming very soon here. Thank you. I want to thank you all for taking the time tonight as we move this collective vision into an actionable plan. I want to thank our design team led by Simone Collins Landscape Architecture, as well as RES, Revision, Forested, and AD Marvel for the outstanding amount of work that it took to get us to where we are today. I also want to thank the funders of this first of its kind Conservation Area Master Plan for the Susquehanna Riverlands Conservation Landscape. That would include the National Park Service, the Conservation Fund, and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We look forward to seeing you at the open house. Please register. We look forward to meeting with you. Thank you all and have a great night.